Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest is Sheriff Jeff Easter of the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office in Wichita, Kansas. And what we're going to be discussing today is a large-scale cooperative federal RICO case, also referred to as a racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations investigation. And this was a very elaborate and large-scale investigation that involved narcotics distribution and various crimes. And the sheriff was very instrumental in the success of this investigation. So we're going to talk about this case in depth today. So Sheriff, thank you very much for being a guest today. I really look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, Jim, I appreciate you inviting me on.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me start with this. I like to ask every guest why it is that you got into law enforcement. What caused you to choose that as your profession? And then maybe you could kind of walk us through where you started and how you ended up as the sheriff.
Absolutely. So, kind of a family business. My dad started with Wichita Police Department in 1968, the year I was born. So I grew up around it. Dad wasn't, and mom wasn't totally thrilled about me joining the police department, but I joined the police department 3 days after I turned 21. Yeah, my brother was in law enforcement as well. 4 years after I joined, he came on the sheriff's office because the new chief over at the police department had a nepotism rule, so he couldn't be hired over there. He hired on with the sheriff's office, and then unfortunately he was shot and killed in 1996 here
I'm
in
sorry.
Wichita. So it's kind of a family business, and so I worked out in patrol for several years, and then joined which we back then we called a SCAT team, Special Community Action Team, which dealt with gang, low-level narcotic crime. Then went on to the gang unit, and so from there got promoted detective, was DEA task force detective up in property crimes, and then got promoted to sergeant, went back out to the streets for a little bit in charge of the SCAT team, and then night and investigations for the police department. Was promoted lieutenant, spent time out in patrol, community policing, and then took over the felony gang assault section that also worked homicides. And so that's the time frame that I was the lieutenant there that we conducted the RICO investigation, was promoted there, became the captain at Patrol North, spent about 5 years there, and then ran for sheriff in 2012, was elected sheriff, and have been sheriff since.
All right, man. That's an outstanding bio, and it sounds like you've done everything, starting out at the lower level and then working, through the different the various aspects of law enforcement and ultimately reaching the sheriff. That is fantastic.
Yep, it's been a great career.
Good deal. Well, today, while we're talking about this, we're going to be using some terms that maybe some listeners might not be familiar with. We're going to use the term RICO. We're going to talk about Crips. We might use other law enforcement terminology, but those are the two primary ones that before we got into the case discussion, I thought maybe let's just kind of briefly talk about who, what the Crips are. Maybe you could just give us a general summary of what they are and who you specifically dealt with there, a specific set of the Crips.
So, kind of go into a little bit of history of Wichita. When I came on in '89, we had some homegrown gangs, the junior boys, the local boys, and the Asian boys. Crack cocaine ramped up. That was the big trade for the gangs at the time. And we started having Crips and gangster disciples and Bloods coming to Wichita out of California, Chicago, and the Tulsa area. So they set up shop here. And then all the violence began. And so we were seeing record years of homicides, drive-by shootings, open air market, crack markets, all of those type of things. So that's how I started my career here as a beat officer. And so that's the ultimate thing for me is I was in athletics and stuff, and so the game of chasing people, doing all those kind of things. And so it's fun, it's exciting, it was dangerous. Like I said, we had the gangs just took over the streets here and decimated certain parts of our community, and the African American race was absolutely decimated with the crack cocaine wars that were going on here. And so, a lot of gang violence on each other. And so we had several different sets of Crips that were always feuding with each other. Overall, we had about 62 different sets of gangs, whether it was within some white gangs, Hispanic gangs, Asian gangs, and African American gangs. The most violent, or the most violence that we saw, was out of the African American gangs competing for the territory and the turf wars that were going on. Some would align with each other. Some were completely against each other. So you had what was different here than you see out in LA. The Crip gangs were always feuding with each other. Now, the Bloods, they'd get decimated constantly because we had a lot more Crips than Bloods here. So they'd always gang up against the Bloods. The Junior Boys, which was a kind of a homegrown gang, was kind of the OGs that started a lot of stuff here, and a lot of Crips came in under the Junior Boys. So we had, neighborhood Crips, insane Crips, rolling 60s, other different sets of Crips here. And then the really young crowd, they split off later on in time. They were still Crips, but they wore green. So they were the Ash Parks, a few other subsets of them. But they did align themselves with the Crips until a couple of them got killed, and then they aligned themselves with the Blood. So what you see as traditional Crip and Blood stuff at some of these other major cities, here they cross the lines. Some would become Crips, and then something upset them, and then they'd switch a gang. Now, some of them got killed over that, but it was very fluid here, and so it was sometimes hard to track. And even to this day, some of the more prolific neighborhood Crips that we had, their sons are Bloods, and so there wasn't that total loyalty to that particular set here. In the beginning, it was that way because the Crips brought that culture here, and so did the Bloods. But over time, it's kind of gotten messy. And since this RICO case, we don't have people wearing colors anymore. We have very little graffiti, any of those other type of things. We still have a lot of gang issues, not what we had in the 90s, and we still get homicides. We still get shootings based on gang activity, but it's not as rampant as it was in the 90s.
That makes complete sense. And, as part of my law enforcement career, I consider it fortunate. I enjoyed working gangs as well. And what you're describing sounds very similar to what I saw in St. Louis. I would call it kind of like a hybrid mix almost of these folks. Like you're saying, you might have like you said, a guy that's a Crip and his cousin is a Blood, and 1 week later they switch. And it's just that, the reason I mention that is it makes it difficult in your investigative pursuits sometimes to track these guys because they're kind of weaving in and out and bouncing between gangs. So that makes complete sense. And then another thing that I want to mention is that you hit the nail on the head. These gangs, a lot of people don't realize the presence of gangs within their communities. They think, oh gosh, that's just in New York or Miami or LA, and they think of what they see in the movies or what they see on TV. Well, that's not reality, as we're going to find out as we talk about your city and your investigation there. These guys are serious gang members committing serious crimes within these smaller communities. So again, I just want to say I look forward to hearing you discuss your case there. Can you maybe tell us what put these guys, you described this myriad of different gangs there within your community. What elevated these Crips to your radar, to law enforcement's radar, and kind of walk us through how the investigation began?
Yeah, so like I said, for years we'd been dealing with these gangs, and the typical stuff that goes along with it. The community really wasn't cooperating because they were scared to death they were going to get shot up next. So the amount of unsolved homicides, unsolved drive-bys. I mean, these guys were getting by with murder, and we knew from the investigations who we thought did it, but trying to prove it is a different story. And so over time, we developed a drive-by task force in 1998 that cut down on some of the drive-bys. Um, and all of these reports, because back then we were very report orientated. So you had contact with these folks. You'd fill out either these gang cards or you'd make a full report of who all they're with, if you took guns, dope, any of that other stuff. And that will become critical when I talk about this,
Yep.
of how well documented we were with everything that we were doing with gangs back in the 90s. And so what ended up happening is that they were on our radar because of those type of crimes they'd committed and gotten by with, and were continuing to commit those type of crimes. And again, they ran the drug world here in Wichita, especially when it came to crack cocaine. So over time, the police department adapted. When I was in the gang unit, they started what was called a targeted offender program. A lot of these folks are on parole, probation, those type of things. There's not enough parole and probation officers. And so each one of us as detectives were assigned out different gang members, and a lot of them were neighborhood Crips, where we would monitor everything. And so back then, if we caught them drinking at a bar, they'd get violated and sent back to prison. Nowadays, they get 7 to 10 chances. So it's not, cops
Sure.
doesn't exist
It's
anymore
night and
because,
day.
yeah, nothing really happens to these folks. But that was critical too, because we were doing that in 95, 96, and 97. And we were sending, because even for us, if we got them off the streets for 90 days or 6 months or a year, that's 90 days, 6 months or a year that we won't have more violence
Right.
or them committing other crimes. Um, so that took place. And again, they were the most prolific, dangerous gang that we had here that was committing most of the homicides and drive-bys. And so there was an individual by the name of James Jones, who I dealt with on like a daily basis, that was part of the neighborhoods. He was kind of higher up in the neighborhoods. Just kind of a side note, I was a field training officer in 94 and had a officer riding with me. We had an area of town that had two bars on both sides of 13th run hydraulic. And when they emptied out on Fridays and Saturdays, it was a mess. They
Mm.
basically block off the main thoroughfare of 13th, fight, shoot, all kinds of stuff. Disturbance with a weapon comes out. He and I start to pull up, and as we're pulling up, James Jones and another guy is firing their weapons into this crowd. We get out, we're getting ready to shoot at them, but there's probably 500 people behind them. So if we missed, of course, I'm going to hit
Right.
somebody.
Right.
And so he takes off running. I chase him. The other guy, his fellow gang member, takes off running. The officer was with me, chases him, get him caught. It turned out his gun was jammed. But as I was running through the parking lot, which was an old Victor station, somebody in the crowd started firing rounds back, hitting the gas tanks as I'm running by. So
Oh man.
just to kind of tell you how, because James Jones is a big key piece to this. And so arrested him 2 or 3 times for possession of crack. Um, Tried to charge him federal once, didn't get it done. So he'd been on our radar for a long time,
Okay.
um, along with some of these other folks that we were really targeting. So, in September 20th of 2006, a beat officer up north makes a car stop, ends up being James Jones. He runs in the car, ditches the car, takes off running on foot. They find him hiding behind a house that we eventually find out is the house he's living at in this abandoned car. They get him into custody. In that car is a safe that possesses a gun, about an ounce of crack, and some other stuff. He had been convicted of other crimes in the past. He knew that this was going to be probably not good for him. And he also knew, because of his record, we was going to be taking this federally. So he wanted to come up and talk to us. So a couple of gang detectives, and again, this is when I was the lieutenant in charge of the gang unit, start interviewing him, and he starts spilling on everything that the gang has been doing for the past 12 years, how it's organized. And believe it or not, they don't call it a secretary or a treasurer or anything else. They had different names for it, but it was organized just like you and I would be in an organization.
Yeah, sure. Sounds
Calls
like
the
it.
shots, everything else. And what correlated with that over the years in SCAT and stuff, when we were doing search warrants on gang homes and narcotic stuff, you would find with certain gang members, they had a list, and they never used their real name, it was always monikers, but a list of who's who in the gang. That would become important later on during this RICO investigation. And we found several things like that in the years prior.
So
And
at that
so,
point there is when it kind of went from a local aspect to it kind of is transitioning towards kind of a collective or a cooperative federal
yeah.
aspect. Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, he
Okay.
talked about several murders, several drive-by shootings, who was controlling the narcotics world, who was kind of doing back then, we didn't really know about human trafficking, but it was already taking place here and we didn't know it. And that was
Hmm.
another way that they were getting money. And, he agreed to go make some buys from some of his fellow neighborhood Crips that was selling cocaine, agreed to cooperate with us. Um, we contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office because we knew that this case was going to go federal. So how we manage that? They gave us a really good advice and guidance on it. And then we started having that discussion about, well, they actually suggested, we have a really good U.S. attorney here by the name of Deb Barnett. And she suggested, with everything that we'd found out, everything that me and some other folks that have been doing this for years knew about the neighborhood Crips, of looking at doing a RICO case on this. And then also a continuing criminal enterprise. So you'll hear me talk about a CCE as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think this would be a good point to just kind of have a brief description or explanation of what RICO is, like we were saying earlier, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. And I don't want to speak for you, but my
No, go ahead.
understanding
You're fine.
it's a essentially you're looking at folks at like you said at the federal level, and you're targeting the overall organized crime aspect like you're describing here. And when you're dealing with the U.S. attorney as you are, that's going to enhance criminal punishments
Mhm.
ultimately at the conclusion of your investigation. Is that a fair explanation
Yeah,
of
it is.
RICO?
I mean, RICO was formed to combat the mobs back in the 30s and 40s and stuff. And so the continuing criminal enterprise um, isn't as hard to prove as the RICO, but there was segments of there that kind of cross over with the continued criminal enterprise. The RICO is a lot harder to prove, a lot harder to gather evidence on, to present to a jury. Criminal enterprise cases are difficult, but not as difficult as RICO. But RICO has sentence enhancements, and it also allows us to go after numerous people um, on that, which is
It
what we end up doing.
it's more beneficial, more of a widespread net, it sounds like. So at this point, you guys roll your sleeves up, and that's kind of the direction you're moving. I'm interested. I think FBI and ATF got involved in your case. Is that right? Or some
Yeah.
of these federal
So
agencies?
yeah. So what happened is that we gave what we had. The U.S. Attorney is like, this is a great case to try to do a RICO here. There'd never been a RICO done in this jurisdiction of the state of Kansas. So we met with FBI. They were interested as well, along with our command staff, and to kind of work through how this would work. Um, when it was determined that this would be a great candidate for a RICO case, of course, the U.S. Attorney had to get with their DC offices to see if they would support it, which they said they would. The decision was made by our command staff to form a task force to address this issue. So that task force included one lieutenant, which was me, 8 detectives, 2 analysts, 2 part-time FBI agents. Eventually, ATF came on as well, and we had 2 part-time ATF agents and then 2 U.S. attorneys assigned to the task force. We also, at that point, I had about around 18 detectives assigned to me. And with all the gang violence and the drive-bys and the everyday stuff coming in, we wouldn't be able to give the time and attention that this case would need. And
Sure.
so the decision was made to relocate us over to what we call the Epic Center. That's also where the U.S. Attorney, FBI, and ATF is housed out of. So we took over a floor there, or a section of a floor, to start the investigative process. We also had to send detectives to some training on what actually RICO is and how do you prove a RICO case and what elements you need and those type of things.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're exactly right. That's a very complicated
yeah,
federal law, and there are specific requirements that you have to get. Like you stated, it's not just a walk in there, do an investigation, slam bam, case closed. It's very intricate
yeah.
as
So
you're going through it.
yeah, it's very interesting because I hadn't, I've heard of RICO, but had no idea how to investigate something like that. So
Right.
we went to the training. In a RICO case, you have to have what's called predicate crimes on each gang member to pursue. You have to establish the predicate crime on each gang member. Predicate crimes include murder, sex trafficking, narcotics trafficking, Hobbs Act violations, money laundering, fraud, and obstruction of justice. So what you're doing is they give you 5 years, a 5-year look back. And if you can establish 3 predicate crimes, whether they were arrested for or convicted of, that counts as a predicate crime. Once you establish that you have 3 predicate crimes, we get to look back another 10 years, so 15 years total. So what that brought in is all the stuff that happened in the 90s. And of
Oh,
course,
okay.
yeah, we went through 2,000 police reports of
Ooh,
all these guys involved in this stuff. And
yeah.
the amount of information that you can glean out of there that connected all these people, the amount of predicate acts that they had committed, a lot of them had been convicted of. Um, I mean, it ended up being um, what we thought was going to be a very difficult task to prove. Uh, was 51 of these guys, it was pretty easy. It
Maybe
was
not
just a
as
lot of
daunting as you thought.
yeah, there's just a lot of painstaking. It took us 6 months, a little over 6 months, to get through all the reports and check off predicate crimes, pull those reports out so we have a copy of it. So when we go to present to a grand jury, we hit all the elements of a RICO case. And so during that time, like I said, going back 15 years, what made this case is all the officers that made all these reports all these years. Instead of, and some of them weren't arrests, some of them were car stops, but they documented who was in the car, all those type of things. And that came to be very crucial in the investigation of this case. So a lot of good work was done over the years that no, we didn't get any sentences out of it, or sometimes crimes convicted out of it, but eventually we did 15 years later.
Sure.
So
Sometimes, like they say, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they're turning, and there's typically results.
Yeah. And so, in 2006, when this started, technology was just kind of coming around. But there was some software that our command staff, we proposed to our command staff to purchase. And it was at the time state-of-the-art software that you could put photos in it, all these lines that draw to who all is connected to who, what police reports you could drill down in it, pull up the police report that's connected to it. And we purchased that software. And I can't tell you enough how much that was extremely crucial to really walk through a grand jury originally to get it indicted, and then the jury itself on the jury trials we had. That thing was 12 feet long, 3 feet wide. So we had to buy this industrial size paper and took it to a copying company, and we were updating it all the time. And we had this wall that had everything on there, and but in the computer program itself, you could drill down into it to look stuff up. That's why those two analysts were so important, because they were entering all that information into this software.
Okay.
But when you laid that out in front of the grand jury and it showed all the connections, it showed all the cases they were involved in, afterward the trial, well, after the grand jury, they're like, "That's incredible," and this was easy. So probably,
So this, I'm
well, one of the
sorry.
best things we spent money on by far.
It sounds like it. And just so I understand and listeners understand, this program would essentially link together. You could say, you could take your, John Smith, and you could put him on that chart, and you could link the cars that he's associated with, the phone numbers that he utilizes, the individuals that he associates with, the charges that he's been arrested for and convicted of. And it kind of, if I'm understanding it right, compiles all that stuff and just lays it out there so you can essentially see that and see how this organization is organized and operates. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's exactly what it did for us.
Okay. Okay.
And so they were constantly updating it when we came in with new information. They were constantly updating that, which would update the charts, update everything in there. And so, again, it was labor intensive, but it was well worth it. Yeah.
Sounds like it. What type of, and I don't mean to interrupt, what type of charges, as you were progressing through this investigation, maybe not historical cases and charges, but what were they doing real time as you were investigating this? You mentioned your source or your cooperator had done some narcotics purchases. Was it primarily drugs that these individuals were involved with, or
Yeah, it
was
was all
there?
crack cocaine.
Okay. Okay.
100% was crack cocaine that they were selling and still selling in 2006.
Okay. All right. So,
Meth
do
was
you
just starting to come around about that time, but crack cocaine was king here.
were they, was your investigation able to determine whether they were involved in, smuggling the cocaine into your area
No.
and then converting and manufacturing the crack, or do you know if they were
Yeah, I'll
bringing
get
the
into that
crack
here
in?
in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
on because we end up getting their main source of supply and his two main sources of supplies, which were cartel related back in Mexico.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, and
Sounds great.
so yeah, we were able to get all that put together. This thing, and I'll go through it, but it broke off into several different investigations, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. So,
That sounds great.
so anyway, during and after the look back, we started undercover operations, more undercover operations, making buys from targeted gang members. Part of the reason for that is we needed predicate crimes. So we started
Right.
making buys from them. We didn't arrest them immediately, but we started making buys from them. When we did arrest some of these folks, you have to remember a lot of these guys, started out at 15, 16, were in their late 20s, early 30s, and have been to prison, several of them. They didn't want to go back, so they started
Mm.
cooperating as well, giving us a lot of information. We then, I knew from my time on the streets, we had a bar called Harry and Ollie's up at Harry and Oliver. And I was the third shift lieutenant, and it was nothing but gang members in there. We had shootings and fights and those
Mm.
type of things. So I knew that that was a problem bar. What we found out through our cooperators and also James Jones, it was a shell company that was the or a shell owner, and that was simply a gang bar that they could freely do what they wanted in there, sell dope in there, whatever they wanted to do.
Almost like a clubhouse, sounds
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And so we conducted surveillance in there. We went in there and made buys from certain gang members that we targeted that was in there, and some buys from the employees of the club. In April of 2007, we conducted a search warrant there at the club. There was about 120 people in there, and we had some SWAT teams with us. There was probably about 100 cops. So
Mm.
we planned this for about a week in advance. It had surveillance going on for about a month, so we knew kind of which day to hit, those type of things. We recovered narcotics. They dropped a ton of guns on the floor. And then a lot of the gang members we were targeting were in there that night. So we
Okay.
were able to show that linkage, and also show that that was part of the enterprise, the continuing criminal enterprise, because we got uh, some more people to talk, especially people that worked at the bar,
Mm.
uh, because they didn't want to go to prison. And so what actually happened on that was able to shut down Harry and Ollie's as a nuisance
Wow,
during this
okay. It
well.
sounds like you guys are making some great progress as you're moving along there.
Yeah, absolutely. So while we were in there, it was pointed out to us who the major supplier of cocaine is to the neighborhood Crips and the Junior Boys, and his name was Tyrone Andrews. Um, At the same time, one of the detectives working on the task force started would eventually would be over 100-page RICO affidavit that contained from the start of this thing all the reports that contained information from the 90s, all the undercover operations, everything else that we had found out. He starts that RICO CCE affidavit so we can have everything in a timeline and
Okay.
all of our elements to be met to prove a RICO case. We then also added a detective from the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office to start doing financial investigations into several of these people, because we also had folks at this point that weren't really doing the gangbanging stuff, but they were directing. And they're
Okay.
directing from really nice homes in some nice neighborhoods, melded
Mm.
into neighborhoods.
Okay.
And so how they can afford a 600,000 to $1 million home, some of these folks that started off as just run-of-the-mill gang members on the streets was concerning to us.
It
So we
sounds
started
like it.
financial investigations as well, which was a separate piece of this. We had two detectives working on the financial side plus IRS.
Okay.
During this time frame, believe it or not, we were turned on to another way that the NHCs were making money. They had set up shop with a local doctor, and it was Medicaid and Medicare fraud that was taking place
Oh, wow.
that they were profiting off of. So we also found out back then we had what was called vision cards. So if you're on any assistance and you go to a grocery store, you had a vision card where you could purchase groceries, stuff like that. They're also conducting fraud on the vision card system. These investigations were worked in conjunction with the Kansas Attorney General's Office, U.S. Department of Housing and Development, and the Kansas Health and Human Development Department. We also had housing fraud that was taking place by these guys.
You make
So
great points here, and I
yeah,
think that's great for listeners to realize that, these guys might be Crip gangbangers, but they're not just slinging crack on the corner. They're committing some pretty elaborate crimes, it sounds like.
yeah,
Okay.
they had some
Yeah.
schemes going on to the
Yeah,
tune of,
exactly.
um, I mean, they were prosecuted in the federal court system. Certain segments of these folks were. And some of them were wives and girlfriends of the neighborhoods that
Mm.
set up this kind of piece of it.
Hmm.
And so it's about $3 million worth of Medicaid and Medicare fraud and about $200,000 worth of vision care fraud that they got convicted on.
That's a substantial amount. When you put that into your big picture, I'm sure at the conclusion with all the drugs, with your drug investigation, your guns and all that, that is an incredible amount of crime that's going on in that region there, it sounds
Oh,
like.
yeah. Yeah, it was a
Okay.
lot.
Yeah.
So over the course of the next 3 months, um, we wanted to do what was called a document search warrant on each one of these gang members' homes that we were targeting for the RICO. Um, and so that included extensive surveillance to ensure where they're living, because these guys hop from house to house to house and those type of things. And so we're set up about 16 hours a day surveillance so that we could
Mm.
say without a doubt they live here. Had patrol and the SCAT teams making car stops sometimes when folks are leaving to establish that they left there. Minor violation type stuff. Nothing.
Hmm.
We just write them a ticket and they just think it's a regular car stop.
Sure.
Um, so we had to establish where they live to obtain that document search warrant. And so this was a major operation because we also made plans to arrest each one of these individuals because we already had some sealed indictments based on everything else, the other probable cause that we had. And what was key for me is that we bring them all into one location, and before we divvy up and start interviewing, they all see each other. So
Mm.
it kind of throws the fear of God in them, and they're going,
Right.
that dude's going to snitch, or that dude is going to do this. And if I want anything out of this, I better talk. And it worked. so
Yeah.
we did the document search warrant, included SWAT teams from PD and outside agencies. There was an old school that we used to train in. We utilized that as our command center. We had a total of 214 personnel from various agencies that were used for this operation. We served 21 search warrants all in one day. Um, most of them were home. Those that weren't, we knew where they were, and we picked them up and arrested them. So we divvied up that 214 personnel into entry teams, search teams, evidence collection teams, interview teams, and transport teams. Once we were done with everybody, we were going to take them to jail and book them for the charges we had on them.
Yeah. That's an elaborate act in itself, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it was
Just planning
the
all
biggest
that.
operation we've ever done. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
and so um, I talked about how we put them all into the gymnasium of the school so they could all see each other, and then one by one we'd pluck them out, put them into interview rooms. Some folks told us to go pound sand. Some folks talked to us because they knew they were in trouble, and so we recovered tons of evidence related to the gang structure, their alliances. We recovered guns, drugs, firearms. And then that's when we find out about the human trafficking and how that part of the
Mm.
enterprise works.
At that point during the takedown, while you're interviewing these folks, that's when that kind of comes to light.
We knew a little bit about it, but we didn't know about the structure until we did a
Okay.
search warrant, found out some information, and that particular person gave us a lot of detail.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so again, we really hadn't known of human trafficking here in the Wichita area until this case, and so it was a very well established human trafficking ring that was mainly runaways that they'd come in contact with. They'd get them high, they'd have sex with them, and then they would start down south. And they'd take them through Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Houston. Some of these girls went through the circuit to Atlanta, out to DC, and then working back towards Wichita, and then they just dump them off.
Do you
And
think
so,
these, if I could just interrupt you real briefly,
yeah,
do you think this trafficking, we could probably spin off in a rabbit hole on just this topic here, but Do you think this trafficking done by these individuals was Crip gang related to generate funds and income for the gang, or was it individuals that were gang members that just happened to be doing this? Do you
Yeah,
see what I'm saying? Is that a fair
yeah.
question?
We weren't able to charge the two individuals doing that stuff with the RICO thing because exactly that reason. We
Okay.
couldn't show that it was for the furtherance of the gang. Now,
Okay.
they were pretty prolific gang members, but they figured out another way to make money without selling
Okay.
dope.
Okay.
And it was the human trafficking side. So they were making tons of money, but it's not like we couldn't prove they were sharing that back to the gang.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
100%. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, no, not at all. In fact, down in Houston, we came across information of two trafficked runaways that were down there. We got with the Houston Police Department, flew down there, ended up recovering those two runaways and doing a search warrant on Trina Ridge's house, who was running them. And he actually lived in Houston now. He lived in Houston, although he's pretty prolific up here and he'd come back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then the guy he was working with that was running him down to Houston, and then Trina Ridge would run them to these other areas, and then they'd hook back up, and the other guy would bring them back to Wichita. So
That has to be satisfying knowing that you're essentially breaking that type of criminal
yeah,
activity
it
up.
was.
It's one thing to score a great drug seizure but drugs are an inanimate object. When you're talking about individuals and people and the hardships they're being subjected to, that had to be a satisfying um, um, conclusion there.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And that I'll talk more about it, some of the other places we had to go. But the other thing, that the partnership with the federal agencies and us, and then with the sheriff's office, but those partnerships you had to have them because we can't go outside our jurisdiction. And so, utilizing the assets and the resources with the FBI and ATF, and then going down to Houston, and then the assets that they had down there, plus the Houston Police Department, was key, or we wouldn't get it
Yeah.
done. So you have to have interagency cooperation on something like this, or you'd never get this kind of case done
Yeah,
whatsoever.
that's a great point. That's a great point.
So we share those kind of relationships here. Some larger cities, you don't always hear about that, but here we have really good relationships. And this was a huge key to the success of this particular investigation.
That's great to hear.
So from that point, we started traveling all over the state of Kansas and the prisons in Arkansas, Indiana, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma to interview targets, because some of these guys were in prison. Some of them were in fed pens that were still calling the shots from inside the prison. So we wanted to wrap them up in this as well. But also, some of them were victims of drive-by shootings, were witnesses to homicides, but never cooperated before. So we wanted to be able to tell them, without telling them exactly what we're doing, but that this is the kind of case we're working on and we need your cooperation. Because your buddy was murdered, we know who did it, or we think we know who did it. You can talk to us now about it. Because in that gang world back then, it was an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
If their buddy got killed, you'd have 3 drive-bys that night on the other
And
people's house, and they wouldn't tell you anything.
yep, I hate to say this, but I am. I would say TV and movies, that's one of the things that they typically do get portray accurately is there are repercussions for individuals in those situations and which causes them not to cooperate or share information like that. So that's good that you guys were able to get these folks years later to cooperate and share information.
Yeah, and I think partly it's because they got a little bit older and they didn't want to go back to prison, although they did. James Jones talking to us originally, I would have never predicted that in 1995
Hmm.
whatsoever. I mean,
Hmm.
those folks, that was the code of the game. You didn't talk, you didn't say nothing. And if they did, they either got shot, beat up, kicked out of the gang, but you get beat up, you get kicked out of the gang, jump in, jump out type stuff. And so That really surprised me. And then some of these other folks that were hardcore gang members, that some of them gave information, some of them they did it for their own, to save their own butts, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But there was 42 homicides, open homicides that we're investigating at this same time involving this group.
That's an
So,
incredible number.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, again, we did that to establish probable cause and predicate acts, traveling all over the place to get more information. While we were gathering that information, we spun off into the narcotics investigation on Tyrone Andrews, because we had several people tell us he's the main supplier for our gang. And so we decided, while we're working on the affidavit, working on the indictments of some of these other folks, we'd spin up a narcotics investigation into Tyrone Andrews. So he was a nobody. He wasn't in a gang. He worked at a local aircraft company and was not on any of our radar.
Hmm.
We conducted weeks of surveillance, and during the surveillance, we took off a vehicle that left his stash house. During that car stop, recovered 2 kilos of crack cocaine out of that car stop. We engaged with ATF at that point to set up surveillance cameras and request permission for a wiretap. Now, I don't know if you've ever done a wiretap, but that takes a while to get.
There's
There's a
some
whole
serious
lot of
red tape.
most people, I think, for your listeners to understand, that is one of the most difficult things that you can obtain as a law enforcement officer, is a wiretap.
And
There's
when we're
so
and
much
when we're
there that
talking, yep, when we're talking wiretap again, like you said, for the listeners, we're tapping into and listening to the phone conversations of these targets of investigation.
and we have to show that there's no other way we can obtain information to dismantle his enterprise without the wiretap. So, we there's certain things there that you got to do, and either it worked or it didn't work, but you got to document that in a whole separate search warrant. It is not easy to get wiretap investigations approved by a federal judge. There's a lot of steps to go through. We did all of that, and we were able to obtain the wiretap, and we identified his 2 suppliers of the cocaine, and one of the individuals had clear ties to the Mexican cartels. That's where DEA started to get involved in this case at that point.
You're making some
Because of that cartel.
incredible progress as you guys are moving along here.
And so, because of the cartel nexus, DEA was able to bring some resources to the table, those type of things to assist. So, on September 22nd of 2006, we had info from the wiretap that Mr. Andrews had gone over to one of the supplier and picked up 2 kilos of cocaine from his supplier. We followed him from where he picked it up to his stash house. He arrived. He was in there for about an hour. Later on, we knew he had cooked up the cocaine into crack. It doesn't take
Okay.
that much. Some baking soda, some water. You boil it. It crystallizes, comes to the top. You just pluck it out of the water. So
There you
it
go.
doesn't take long to do it, and it's much cheaper. And so that's why it's such a scourge, because it was very cheap to buy on the streets. He carried out a duffel bag, put it in his car, and we knew he was getting ready to make deliveries to various NHC or neighborhood Crip gang members. Lieutenant in narcotics, Lieutenant Scott Hireman, and I were together. We were trying to make plans on when best to do a search warrant on his house and also his stash house, those type of things. And we knew he just picked up 2 kilos, and we knew he was getting ready to deliver crack. So at that point, we made the decision, let's just take him off now. And so we had, again, a SCAT teams. We had a detective that was in a marked vehicle. It's also a canine detective up in Narcs. We had him stop him, and he stops him, identifies him, and we tell him, hey, we got probable cause, go ahead and take him into custody. Mr. Andrews opens the door. He reaches in to try to get hold of his arm. He floors it and takes off.
Oh, wow.
Throws out the duffel bag. So we requested that the detective stay with the duffel bag, but we had some
Hmm.
other units that were on the way. So they picked him up. We chased him. Scott and I, in an area of town here where it kind of didn't know really where he was going, was able to block him in and get him into custody. So in the bag was a kilo of crack that he had cooked up and a gun. And
Hmm.
so we conducted a search warrant on his stash house and his main residence. We recovered the rest of the cocaine, other drug dealing type material, ledgers, all that kind of stuff that you need, um, along with the remainder of the cocaine that he hadn't cooked up yet.
Okay.
So turns out he was a major drug dealer here in Wichita. And so at the conclusion of that, what do you think slowed down? All the
Yeah.
crack dealing. Because he
Yeah.
was, neighborhoods kind of controlled it here, along with the junior boys, and their main supply just ended. So, um,
Any idea to tell back at that time during your investigation, were you able to determine like a time frame of how long this guy was such a prolific dealer in that region?
yeah, for about 5 years, he really didn't talk to us. Um,
Hmm.
but through other interviews, and it was estimated by DEA that he sold about $11 million worth of cocaine here in Wichita.
Wow. That's a lot of poison on the streets, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned before, we're also focused on about 42 gang-related unsolved murders that the neighborhood Crips had been involved in. So, the task force was made up of a lot of gang detectives, but I also had a homicide detective and some other folks that could look at some of this stuff. At
Hmm.
the end of the day, we solved 7 of those cases. And they're either cleared by charging in district court or over in federal court. And so one of those cases, and I was working the streets when this happened. We had a individual that had gone in and done a drug house robbery by the name of Eddie Walker. He was sitting in jail, and he called out to his buddies to do a hit. And the main witness was this female that at the time was pregnant, but now she had, I can't, it was a baby. I think it was like 8 months old, and her boyfriend was there. So this group, including Jason Tisdale and 2 other guys, which we still think it was James Jones that went in, but he's claiming it's not. But they had their faces covered. He's claiming it was
Hmm.
somebody else, but um, went in and shot them, killed them both. And so that sent ripples through the community as well because she was getting ready to testify in the prelim on the ag robbery, and then she was murdered. So back then we got zero cooperation from people on crimes, and so we're able to prove that case plus 2 other murder cases that Jason Tisdale did, and then the remaining cases, it was uh, we had information of individuals that we thought were the ones that did the murders. We had a district attorney here, and I agree. I understand where she's coming from. You have gang members testifying on gang members that can't be trusted, and so she chose not to charge some of those other cases because we didn't have near the evidence like we had in these 7 cases that we just didn't have to rely on convicted gang members ratting on each other. And so those cases still remain open. The gratifying thing about that is that, who we thought was doing them and who we thought was involved, we had other gang members confirmed to us.
Yeah.
And so we knew we were on the right path from day one when the homicide happened. And that just kind of confirmed that where we were at. It's unfortunate that we couldn't solve them per se by charging people, but still solving 7 unsolved homicides
Oh, yeah.
was personal for us. So
That's substantial. I mean, just based off your investigation and how it spread and became all encompassing, that is super impressive to solve 7 of those murders.
and it. We had the right command staff, the captain and the colonel and the chief over investigations that truly believed in this as well. The chief at the time had, he grew up in the northeast side of town where all this was taking place, and had a very big connection to that particular community, and was super supportive of us doing this. And so, which is a good thing because we were targeting only one gang, and this is also during the time frame where racial profiling was starting to become a big issue,
Hmm.
those type of things. And this was an African American gang, plain and simple. And he was African
Right.
American. We had a mayor that was super supportive. He didn't know much about the investigation. He just wanted the gangs gone. He was African American. He was super supportive of everything we were doing. So we just had the right group in place to be supportive to be able to do this type of investigation. So at the end of the day, we executed 71 search warrants, including one in Houston, Texas. We indicted or charged 51 neighborhood Crip and junior boys in federal or district court. 28 of the gang members were indicted for RICO and CCE charges. We seized 10 homes, 26 vehicles, 182,000 in cash, several guns, and large amounts of cocaine. So it was very, very successful endeavor.
Yeah, I've been in law enforcement 30 years, and listening to you today, that is an impressive, uh, cooperative, collective investigation. I mean, that is phenomenal work.
Yeah.
What kind of a time frame could you guesstimate from the time you guys really started focusing on them? Is it fair to even ask, you know, from start to finish?
Yeah. So I took over half the gang detectives with me, and we still were having all this violence. But I kept trying to say, look, if this can be successful, the fruits of our labor is gonna pay out at the end.
Hmm.
We were given a year to try to get this done. Um,
Hmm.
and from the point of starting the investigation to the point of indictment and starting the process for the U.S. attorneys to start prosecution was a year. And
Wow.
so that's why I think we could have done more on some of the HUD housing, vision card, Medicaid, Medicare fraud, but we didn't have the resources or the time. That's why we handed that off to the different entities that investigated that. Um, and they took what we had gathered and built a case around that. They didn't really expand it from there, which is fine. I mean, they have a limited amount of resources as well. But that's why that was handed off, because that could have just kept going. The
Sure.
financial investigations, we dedicated 2 people in IRS to nothing but the financial investigations. That's why we seized 10 homes and 26 vehicles.
Yeah.
Um, and so, anything that we do, they learn from. So nowadays, there's no gang members that have cars or homes registered in their names whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, these guys, a lot of law enforcement and a lot of just general public look at gangsters or gang members as, they're just, they're low intelligence levels. They're just knucklehead street thugs. But a lot of them are very, smart and
Mhm.
and cunning in the execution of the crimes that they commit. How
Well, and
about, no,
the
go
other
ahead.
thing, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jim.
No, 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 go ahead. I apologize.
Um, the other thing is some of those folks that we took the homes and stuff from. Those were the low level gang members in the early '90s that had worked their way up the gang. That they just directed everything. They weren't selling dope on the streets anymore. They weren't
Mm,
going out doing homicides. They were directing that stuff, but they were pocketing a lot of the money that the gangs were making for them because you have what they call soldiers, which is your younger group of gang members that want to make a name for themselves, and they're out doing the shootings, they're out doing the or the drug house robberies, they're slinging the dope, all that stuff. And then once they prove themselves, they can that's that hierarchy of the gang, they move up. Um, and so because we went through 2,000 reports, we could show that where they started at in the gang, and that's who they were back then. And the
hmm.
hierarchy, they went up, and now they
Man,
were controlling the gang, and so that was
that
a key
that's a
to what we did.
yeah, that is, the longer we talk about this, the more I'm realizing what a fantastic overall investigation this was. And, you've said a couple things here that I think are super important, even today's world of investigations and particularly gangs, is document everything you can document. Because like you said, the officer might think, maybe this is irrelevant or this isn't worth documenting or writing a report. But maybe at the time that's the case, but 6 months, a year, or like you said, years down the road, that could come into play to further and make your investigation so successful. Number one, documenting things are important. And number two, you said this early on, is the importance of cooperating with your law enforcement partners, getting along with them. You're going to be more, this just as well, if not more than I do. You're going to be more effective and successful if you're cohesive and you can get along and utilize the tools from the sheriff's department, the tools from DEA, the funding from the FBI, or whatever it is. Your overall approach can be more successful. And it sounds like your investigation is a prime example of that.
Oh, I appreciate it. Like I said, it was a long time coming and it was very successful. I mean, at the end of the day, um, the prosecution lasted for another year and a half, so I had to keep two detectives still over at the Epic Center working every day with prosecutors because that's when I shouldn't say the real work, but the work to get them convicted started then.
Right, right. Did many of these
And
guys go to trial? Maybe you said it already, but did many of them actually go to trial?
so there was 8 of them that decided it'd be a good idea to go to trial at the same time. So you had 8 defense lawyers, 8 of them, 2 prosecutors, and they were some of the first ones that went to trial. They all got convicted, and some of the other ones decided, I'm going to plea. I think we had maybe 2 other trials out of this whole thing that we had to testify to. But yeah, that original set of 8, that was, I've never done that either. So when you're up there testifying and each one of those defense attorneys get a shot at you.
Yeah,
And so that was a little different.
that's
Um,
not pleasant.
yeah. And so, but what was also funny, because I got to sit through that whole trial, is how many of those defense attorneys were pointing fingers at the co-defendants that were sitting on either side of them.
I bet.
Put it all off on them. And so they just completely cannibalized themselves and turned on each other. And at
Yeah,
the end of the day, everybody pled or or was convicted. Um,
yeah.
so
Outstanding.
51 people. So.
That, I can't say it enough. That's super impressive investigation. Um, which leads me to the question. You've been in law enforcement quite a while now. This case, that we discussed here today, compared to other cases that you're experienced in, was this the most complicated case, or did you work many other cases just as complicated or even more? Or labor intensive, perhaps, might be the right word.
From a labor intensive standpoint, yes. Um, Very labor intensive. I mean, some of the homicides tied to drive-bys, and you got 100 of them.
Yeah.
They're all tied to the same group and stuff. Working those type of cases can get complicated as well. It just all fell into place that we happened to get the right people that gave us information throughout this investigation that spun into all this other stuff. So I mean, it was very labor intensive, but it was work that we had a bunch of dedicated people. They've been around this destruction and everything else that had been taking place for 15 years, and so they're very task orientated, and they knew what they were doing was going to have a good outcome. I mean, at the end of the day, in 2008, after we, took they maybe not have been to trial, but took all these people off the streets, we only had 13 homicides in 2008. I became the captain in 2008 up at Patrol North, which is predominantly where a lot of this stuff happened. Our first gang-related homicide, well, first homicide of the year that happened to be, which happened also to be gang-related, was in August of
Mm,
2008. And
wow.
so it decimated the gang stuff. And um, again, it was unprecedented. There really hadn't been too many departments that ever tried this. And so, and we saw for 4 or 5 years a total decrease in gang-related homicides, gang-related drive-bys, all of that stuff. Just it tanked for a while.
Sounds like an overall and far-reaching positive effect as far as law enforcement and society goes.
It was. What you have to worry about there is who's going to fill that void. So the Bloods
Right.
started trying to fill that void. And there wasn't enough neighborhoods to fight back, so they kind of took over the drug trade. So the drug trade just switched to somebody else.
Okay.
So, after my time up there, they went after the Bloods for some other stuff, got some convictions for them, not in the RICO stuff, but
Hmm.
they really started targeting the Bloods. So, you have to keep the pressure up on these folks. And
Yeah.
um, it, it's targeted enforcement to the folks that are committing the most heinous or violent crimes. And so, we really didn't get any fight back from the community. In fact, what we saw of the community was thanking us, and they started cooperating when they had stuff going on, because we actually addressed an issue that they wanted addressed, but didn't want to have to be the ones to tell us about it because they were
Right.
scared to death, which I completely got.
Sure.
And so, once community policing was able to really go into those neighborhoods and really start working with the neighbors and stuff, relationships got a lot better. We received a lot more information on drug houses, on shootings that happened, those type of things. And so, it at the end of the day, we also wrote up a state RICO statute for the state of Kansas that they adopted in '08 as well. So we have a state RICO, which has
Really
been
based
utilized.
off this.
Yeah. So Dodge City, Kansas, and there's another agency up towards the Kansas City area, both done RICO cases through the state
That is
statute.
awesome. I did not realize that. That
Yeah.
is impressive. So I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it for the sake of listeners. In your opinion, is it a positive thing to work a cooperative RICO investigation?
Oh, absolutely it is.
Yeah.
But understand it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you have to have the right prosecutors on board that's willing to spend the amount of time that they had to spend, both while we're working this case, because the amount of search warrants that they had to approve, and um, of course, the prosecutions and all the intricacies of that. I mean, their job was not easy, but they both did an excellent job.
And I'm sure you can attest to this going, working that there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into this. And it's not
Yeah.
Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
We weren't home much that year.
That's kind of what I was getting at. I would imagine that.
Yeah, it was rough on some people's home life, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day, was it worth it? Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing this case. I did not realize the far-reaching effects that it had and how I knew it was successful, but I didn't realize how successful it was because just hearing you say that the community, it's one thing for law enforcement to conclude an investigation and think collectively within law enforcement, hey, we did a great job. This was really effective. And you hear it from your prosecutor. But when you hear that from the community,
Mhm.
that's icing on the cake, knowing that what you did was the right thing to do. So thank you for
Yeah,
doing
and
that. And
out of
thank you for
the
sharing.
7 homicides that we resolved, those families got closure. They were very thankful that we didn't just forget about the
Right.
case.
Yeah.
Uh, and one particular case, John Rangel, he was just driving home, exited I-135 on the first. A couple gang members came up to him, wanted to rob him of his car, and just shot him right then and there. Total
D-
innocent victim, had nothing to do with anything.
despicable. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
those that gives you some pride as well, that we was able to bring closure to those families.
Absolutely. And I don't think so, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. Is there anything we need to circle back on to cover about this case? I don't think so because you were incredibly detailed about this. But before we kind of conclude here, I just wanted to pose that question to you.
I don't think so. I hope
Yeah.
your listeners enjoy the hearing the story, and
Oh, I'm confident they
maybe law
will.
enforcement that maybe listens to you, that this is
Yeah.
another avenue if they're having those kind of issues. This is an avenue if you have cooperation with U.S. Attorney's Office and the other agencies. This is an
Yeah.
avenue that you can decimate a gang on.
That's a great point, Sheriff. Although you might be a local sheriff's department or you might be a police department, the United States Attorney's offices are receptive to working with state and locals. And you just hit the nail on the head again. Great tool, great resource to utilize. So, there's many learning points from this conversation. And I think one of the most important is for state and local law enforcement, don't be afraid to go uh, to the federal prosecution, to your U.S. attorney in your local jurisdiction, and pose these questions to them. That's a great point.
Yeah, and the other key to that federal prosecution is they get more time, and a lot of
Correct.
times
Yeah. Yeah.
they get
That's
10
another
years, they got to do
positive.
10 years.
Right.
I
It's
think
not
this.
you get sentenced to 5 years and you actually did 30 days and
Yeah.
time served and they boot you out. So yeah, another excellent point. Well, let me transition from this case investigation. Is there anything about your sheriff's department you'd like to mention, or maybe tell us about, or could you tell us about the size of your sheriff's
Yeah, yeah.
department?
So
Your social
Wichita is the
medias.
largest. Yeah, Wichita is the largest city in Kansas. We have a population base of about 550,000 countywide. We have 554 employees here, and so that's split up between our commission side, which does the traditional law enforcement. We have investigations, patrol. Our judicial division takes care of the courtrooms and transportation of inmates, and then also all the civil process stuff that we have to serve. Um, we have a detention facility. Our jail here is 1,477 beds, so it's bigger than most prisons in
Oh
Kansas.
wow, that's pretty large.
Yeah, so roughly 300 of the employees we have here at the sheriff's office are inside the facility. But very professional organization. We're known for our professionalism and the way we conduct business throughout the state. It's busy. The difference between being a Wichita police officer and being the sheriff over here is the jail. Any
Oh
sheriff
yeah.
that's listening knows exactly what that means. That's an animal. And so, but we have our fair share of issues, but we have a very dedicated staff. And right now, we're doing very well on staffing. Now, we're always recruiting. We can always use good people.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. If you're looking for qualified candidates, if somebody listening to this were interested and in your area, would they stop in to get an application or go to your website to find
Yep.
out more information?
Yeah, so if they go to our website, which is just sedgwickcountysheriff.org, or they can call up here 316-660-3905, and we'll get them out to training to start the process. But either way, that's how you have contact us and can apply. And so, but we're always looking for people. During COVID, we were down 127 deputies inside the jail, so it was a mess. All of us,
Oh,
including myself, was working 8-hour shifts in there because we have to maintain the safety and security. And I'm thankful to say we only have eight openings right now inside the jail. So
well,
we've been able to wrangle that in and get better people applying and those type of things. So we're kind of leading the state in health and wellness. We have a full health and wellness unit and a couple therapists that are employed by us, which is a whole nother conversation of why
oh yeah,
that's needed in
definitely.
our
Yeah.
environment and what we do. And the difference of my generation where you don't talk and you keep everything in. We've seen what that causes my generation of cops. A lot of suicides, a lot of alcoholism rates, and a lot of divorces. So
Yeah.
we started that about 4 years ago, and it's been a huge success. That's part of the reason why we're retaining people, because we actually care for our people and we're a family. And so very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with our health and wellness unit.
That sounds outstanding. That's very uh, um, progressive, approach to treating these situations. And you're exactly right. That could be a whole nother conversation one day. But that's great to hear the positive steps that you're taking at the sheriff's department there to care for folks and to just make sure everybody's doing okay, because it is a high stress
Yeah.
profession. So kudos to you guys there. Well, Sheriff, I want to thank you sincerely. Again, I really appreciate you sharing the details of this investigation. This was incredibly impressive and successful. And, hearing things like this makes me proud to be part of that law enforcement community. So thank you again.
No, thank you for having me on, Jim. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed
All
it.
right. All right. Thank you. Well, let me transition to my listeners. And before we sign off here, I just want to remind you to please like, share, follow, and subscribe my social media. That really helps me in bringing top caliber, great quality guests like Sheriff Jeff Easter to the program here. So I just want to mention that to the listeners, and everybody stay safe out there. Thank you. The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.